Now, as I mentioned before in the previous video, my wife unironically got scared from watching Eurovision. There was a performance by a certain artist, which I guess they were LARPing as a witch, creating what appeared to be some sort of pagan ritual, summoning a demon or whatever, right? And this was frightening for many people here in Eastern Europe who are more of a religious orientation. I have no idea how Muslims in the UK received that performance. But it did end up with an interview from the performer who happened to lose against Israel, and they were crying on air, basically saying that the EBU has been horrible to them and they don't care, and it's all about the community. But as the interview goes on, it mentions that the person is non-binary, and my wife asked me like, "What is that?" And she's not, asking this in a disingenuous way. Like she legitimately has never heard about it, and having to explain it to a person that like has the mentality of someone living in 2012, I guess, was quite challenging. Very difficult. Basically, what I realized is that when you look it up, the word gender is a word that is quite recent in the dictionary, and many languages around the earth don't even have it because they just use biological sex interchangeably. And especially when you look at people like Dr. Moody and you research them and what they did, it's a little bit concerning. But anyway, right? So, what exactly is gender? Like that was the interesting thing, and what I came up to believe, it's kind of like personality, really. Like this is what they mean. It's like when gender is a spectrum, they want to say that personality is a spectrum. Like when they say, well, gender is the way that a man is expected to behave in a society. It's like, well, it's the personality that is expected, right? So it's kind of like that. But what I would also like to say is that there are certain genders, like gender fluidity and whatnot, where they basically say, well, okay, now I can be a man, and in 5 minutes I can be a woman, and then I can be a man again, right? So it's kind of like fashion, isn't it? Because when I grew up, things were a little bit different. Now it's kind of like a monoculture. Now like every community is very similar in nature. But when I used to grow up, there were a lot of vibrant and different communities. So you had like the Goth kids, which had their own lingo and their own behaviors and their own patterns and circle of friends. And then you had like the heavy metal kids, which had their own style and their own clothing, and they would dress a certain way. And then you had the jocks, and the jocks had their own culture, their own subculture, that is, and they dressed a certain way. And but like the important thing is the way they dressed, right? So like the way they dressed was to signify to other people not just that they belong as part of a culture, but how other people should perceive them. So they were proud of being goth, and they would dress like goth, and they wanted other people to know that they are goth, and to behave towards them in a certain manner. And how is this very different than what we see today, right? Like when someone goes online and they put a pronoun or they identify as a, how is it that really like just changing the fashion? It's like you are presenting yourself to the public in a way, and you want the public to treat you in the way that you're presenting. Well, like for instance, if I put a business suit and I go out, I do expect people to treat the situation a lot more respectful, right? Because like if you have like 5 or 6 people and they're all wearing business suits and they're sitting next to each other, like it creates an area of professionalism or an area of sobriety. Like if you go to a funeral or something or a wedding, right? Like it creates a specific atmosphere just because everyone is wearing that suit. And it's like a way of human expression, I suppose, that you want other people to acknowledge. Like if you're wearing a suit, you want people to be careful not to step on your shoes or not to accidentally put any dirt on your suit or touch your suit, right? Like versus if you're just wearing casual clothing and then someone accidentally stumbles on you, like you're still going to be upset, but not at that same level. I think it's kind of like that. But the problem comes when you have like certain barriers, like certain things in society that are meant to protect the vulnerable. Like for instance, the reason we have different prisons is to protect the women from the men. Now you can make the argument that if they were a criminal and they committed a crime, then they shouldn't be afraid of doing the time or whatever. But it's also to punish the men themselves. It's like you wouldn't want a criminal to be rewarded by being locked up with a bunch of women that haven't seen a man in ages, right? So like you wouldn't want a disingenuous person that doesn't necessarily identify as a woman but wants to take advantage of the system to just like change in the clothing to just use the correct fashion in order to justify like why we need to lock him up with the ladies. And you have like things like women's shelter, and this is where J.K. Rowling got into a lot of trouble. Like J.K. Rowling, before 2018, she was incredibly progressive. Like she supported every single progressive cause. She donated money to progressive issues. She was anti-Brexit. She was supporting labor. Like she was a very left-leaning woman. Until it was the thing with the domestic shelters. And she even respects the pronouns, and at the time she was respecting the pronouns, and she was very inclusive. But she's basically like saying, no, like a women's shelter should only allow women, and this is, I believe, due to the fact that she was a victim of domestic abuse herself. So she's basically like having this opinion in public saying that, well, I don't think that a person that's a man who identifies as a woman should simply be allowed into a women's shelter with no other verification. And this is what got her ostracized. Like, this is what got her completely banned. And I think, like, this is where the conversation comes up with. It's like, how is it any different than just fashion? It's like, if you sport the right fashion, you can now break the barriers in society that were done to protect a certain group of people. So what is the point of the barriers then, right? Because, like, again, there is no like objective way of knowing if the person genuinely identifies as such, and most left-leaning people don't even care. They will just say, well, if a person just says the magic word, I identify as, then they are. And even South Park made fun of this. Like, even South Park made jokes about this, and South Park itself pointed out how ridiculous this whole thing is becoming. But unfortunately, no one seems to care or listen. And I guess like most people are just afraid of speaking out because you're seeing what's happening to famous people like J.K. Rowling. So most people are like, well, but, I mean, if it happened to her, I don't want it to happen to me. So they're literally afraid of speaking out. Still, it's interesting that a lot of countries, especially here in Eastern Europe, are resistant to this ideology simply because the words, they do exist in our language, but they sound really bad, right? And the people who are creating the ideology, they're not struggling in order to try to adapt the language for the targeted audience. So when you say non-binar, it sounds really bad in Romanian. And unless they try to figure out new words and new context, I don't think they're going to be very successful in promoting this type of ideology here. It's immediately recognized for being an ideology that's coming from the Anglosphere. And this is why a lot of leftists freaked out when Italy banned the English language in official court documents and official documents coming from the government, because a lot of these terms were not even translated. Like, they would just take them as is and use them in the language of the host nation and try to put them in legislation and stuff. But now they can't because the terms are in English, so they would have to translate them into Italian, which isn't impossible, but apparently the people that are pushing this ideology are also very lazy. Let me know what you guys think, though, and as usual, I will see you in the comment section. Take care.